BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Sheila Dillon. Grannies are what we're into in this edition of the food programme, and I speak from experience.
I'm one of those grannies. I hadn't thought much about that and food until I was making scones with my 3.5-year-old grandson, Otis, while his 6-year-old sister, Viv, looked on. The whole enterprise was a great success, the cooking, the anticipation, the eating. But then, I'm lucky. I'm part of a lucky generation. I can make scones because I learned how in primary school. There's no romantic link back to my own grannies. Only one of them lived near us and she was a great cook, but I was only allowed in the kitchen if I was good, meaning kept quiet and out of the way. But I was drawn to the smells and the busyness of her kitchen, the pig's head being boiled with vegetables for brawn, the butter melted and spiced to pot the brown shrimp, the mutton chops braised with onions, water, and, essentially, a beef stock cube, the cakes. I learned, standing on the scullery step, what good taste tasted like. I also knew that somehow that was linked to how my grandma shopped, on a tight budget, because I went to the market with her. Good food, unselfconsciously cooked and eaten, a way of life. Hard work and a lot of pleasure. Well, that's gone. She was a full-time housewife. I'm not. My mother wasn't either, though she was also a great cook, managing to feed 3 children a hot, tasty meal every evening, stews, pies, soups, vegetable bakes. In Granny's place now, we have the market, the global market, forming our tastes. And in this country, that's mostly a taste for junk, ultra-processed foods, salty, sugary, fatty. Foods manufactured to be Moorish. Supermarkets and corner shops are packed with them. And then there's our takeaway habit. Despite the high cost of living, research by KPMG suggests nearly a third of us eat one every week. And that figure is 58% in London. Part of the reason, it seems, if you're feeling pessimistic, that we're bedeviled in the UK with ballooning rates of obesity and chronic diseases. But there's an odd kickback developing to the grab-and-go culture, and it has to do with grannies.
Hey, Nonna Pia.
Yes.
You making dinner tonight? What are you going to make?
Risotto Bolognese.
Risotto?
Welcome to episode 1 of Cooking with Grandma. Today we're making lobako, or turnip cake.
First video was pasta garlic and oil, and it got I think, 5 million views.
Yeah, too many.
And then now I think over 100 million views.
Yeah.
But you know the population of Sicily is like 5 million.
Yeah.
So let's follow that unlikely narrative, grannies. They're now thick on the ground in the social media world. Is that just a temporary buzz or a trigger for some questions like, what are grannies worth in helping us live life with more pleasure and better health? I'm Sheila Dillon, a granny, and this is the food programme. So let's begin with the really big granny phenomena, Pasta Grannies on YouTube. Vicky Bennison is its founder and is now author of 2 books about the grannies she champions.
Its raison d'etre is to film grandmothers around Italy make pasta by hand. 100-year-old Verena lives in Ales in Sardinia. It's very niche. I just noticed that where I live in central Italy, it was only older women that were making pasta by hand on a daily basis. And I thought, someone should make a record of that. And it turned out that person was me. She cracks 2 eggs and whisks them before pouring them into the ricotta. A lot of the ambassadors of Italian cooking sing the praises of grandmothers and their aunts and older women, but they're never seen. Thought it was probably a book, but the physicality of pasta making required video, and that's how it got started.
Vicky's channel now has more than 1 million subscribers, and there are hundreds of videos of these women all over Italy making mostly, pasta. It caught the public's attention in 2017, but then...
The day that it went viral, it was like ticker tape. It was like kind of grrrr, and I thought my channel had been hacked, and my husband was going, do you want to complain to YouTube that your numbers have gone up by 100,000?
What do you think is the attraction? As you say, in media life, older women are not centre stage. You know, they're seen as irrelevant.
Yeah, completely. Well, I think that's precisely it. There is a kind of need for home cooking, but also that kind of security and comfort that you get. In the pandemic, our viewing figures went up 60%. And I had people writing to me saying, I'm so anxious and the thing that calms me down is watching the grandmothers. It does trigger very warm memories, I think.
What effect do you think it's had on any food culture?
So from my tiny backwater of the food media landscape is that I think it's encouraged people to have a go. Also, I think the recipes aren't complicated. And the fact that we've got grandmothers not using the scales and just kind of doing it, I think is encouraging.
Yeah, there's nothing pretentious about it. How do you find your grandmothers for filming?
I have a granny finder. Yeah, Livia Di Giovanni. She's currently on her way to Rome to be interviewed by Rai Uno.
Rai Uno is one of Italy's most popular television networks.
So the Italians are finally starting to kind of go, oh, maybe she's got a point.
Well, that slightly contradicts what you were saying before. We have this romantic idea that Italian families really value their nonnas, their grannies.
Yes, their own grandmother.
But nobody else's.
No, just theirs. So the idea that you'd be interested in someone from Liguria when you live in Marche is like, why bother? We don't need that food.
As that fiercely regional country gets less regional, people travelling for work and exposure to social media, recipes and dishes that were once unknown outside a small area are becoming more generally familiar.
Pasta Grannies is kind of recording a kind of changing of the guard, if you like. You know, what grandmother will be cooking in 20 years' time is definitely going to be different from what she is doing at the moment.
You find a big difference between grannies age 65 and those age 95?
Oh, completely. For women of my age, 65, cooking has become a choice. We've benefited from being able to go out to work, which was not the case for women who are 95. And I think their daughters couldn't get out of the kitchen quick enough. So the younger generations have discovered that actually you can have both. You can have a career and you can have a lovely time making pasta at the weekends. The kind of muscle memory that's associated with making it every day won't be the same for the younger women, younger people. Let's not forget that also it's become a thing that young men do as well. It's now something that everybody can join in and do.
A few days ago, you were filming with a granny and you kindly let us zoom in to see you in action.
Yes, last week we were in Crema, which is near Cremona. We met Firenze, who made the tortelli that are famous from Crema, called tortelli cremaschi. And absolutely fascinating filling for this because it's all sweet ingredients with grana padano cheese added for good measure. And it's a very medieval stroke Renaissance approach to not being too bothered about whether it's savoury or sweet. It's just delicious.
In Fiorenza's kitchen, we had Vicky's granny finder, Livia Di Giovanni, to translate for us. I asked Fiorenza how she learned to make this very particular dish.
Mi ha insegnato la mia nonna e la mia mamma.
So she has learned from her grandmother and her mom, and these used to be made during festive days like Easter or Christmas, and each component of the family had its own rule. So, for example, some of them had to roll the pastas, and someone that had to layer them all in a good way. So each component of the family had a different rule, so involved the whole family.
So what's so particular about it? Can you describe it a bit more?
La pasta, prima di tutto.
So first of all, this dough doesn't contain any egg, so it's called pasta matta.
E il ripieno è composto da
And the filling is made with 11 different ingredients.
So there are several biscuits. Yes, Mostacino, for example, is one of the biscuits that contains loads of different warming spices. There's lemon peel, this weird peppermint thing that goes in, chocolate, and then grana padano cheese.
It sounds extraordinary. Fiorenza, in the United Kingdom, we sometimes see that grannies are passing their skills to their grandchildren because the mothers and fathers in the generation between cannot cook. Is that sometimes the case in Italy?
Sì. Perché le mamme
nowadays mothers don't have time. They work hard and they don't have time to cook much as in the past.
So do you feel hopeful that a younger generation will keep these traditional ways of cooking going, keep them alive?
Secondo me sì.
She thinks yes, for sure. Grandchildren are the hope for this, because they see the grandmother cooking, and if they see the grandmother cooking, they might ask in the future also for their mom to be cooking, and she will have to do it.
So how often, Firenze, do you cook? Do you cook every day?
Tutti i giorni.
Yes. Every day.
Tutti i giorni cucino, per forza.
Per forza, by force. No rest for Firenze. Vicky, I don't want to generalize too much, but how would you, as a British person, compare the relationships that Italians have with their grandmothers and their grandmothers' cooking and the relationships that British people have with theirs?
Well, I think you probably have to go back to the Industrial Revolution and the fact that we were moving around the country for our jobs much sooner than the Italians. Italians still will divide up a home into apartments, multi-generational living. This is not the case in every single family, but it is striking that difference between the Brits and the Italians. And that, in turn, has an impact on who's doing the cooking, who participates in that meal. Everybody's still sitting down to Sunday lunch.
Do you think there's potential for going around Britain and filming Grannies or
not? I often harbour dreams of Pasta Grannies goes global. There must be so many cuisines and grandmothers that need filming and recording. In fact, I'd like to set up a kind of institute to support people do that.
I mean, before you got going on Pasta Grannies, there was Mary Taylor Cimetti, an American who went to Sicily a long, long time ago, documenting the culinary history of Sicily. I mean, you read her books and they are a history, but everybody thought beforehand that wasn't important. That's not how you would get to understand the history of a key part of Europe.
Completely. Her book is wonderful. So I think it always boils down to people following that line of inquiry and putting it down, whether it's on paper or via YouTube. Start doing it yourself. Get people joining in. Go out there and do it.
Vicky Bennison, the founder of Pasta Grannies and the author of 2 books documenting the recipes that have been shared with her over the years. Of course, there are those, even in Britain, who've learned a lot from their grandmothers and have celebrated it, like food writer Clare Finney. Her grandmother, Joan Fox, is a big character in Clare's food memoir, Hungry Heart. I went to meet Clare at Joan's house in Eastbourne. Clare had told me that, with luck, her grandma would make millionaire's shortbread.
That's it. Break it quite small, Clare, because it'll melt quicker then.
We used to make this with you when we were little, and I think this is always my favourite bit.
Yes, well, the people who come to your house, you make what they like.
Yeah, you've nailed this. That's just the right amount.
Good.
My brother made this during lockdown because we missed so much of Grandma's cooking, and he used very posh chocolate for the topping.
Oh no.
And it didn't taste the same.
No, you just want ordinary, just plain chocolate.
Just plain chocolate.
Are you going to leave it like that, or are you going to smooth it?
As Clare spreads the chocolate over the layers of homemade caramel and shortbread, we moved on to stories of earlier years in the hotel that Joan and her husband owned.
My book, Hungry Heart, which is sort of about my life in food, but it's also about love and food in general. There's a reason it begins in my grandmother's hotel kitchen with me making millionaire's shortbread, because we spent a lot of our childhood in the hotel kitchen. So that sort of love and food was so inextricable from such a young age. In an emotional sense, that's how it shaped me. And then in a practical sense, I really wish I'd picked up more, to be honest. Because whenever it comes to anything like making a gravy, making a toad in a hole, anything that involves what we now call old-fashioned cooking, both my mum and I will still call Grandma about it. I would say the one thing that is embedded within me is a real aversion to waste. I wouldn't say I'm anywhere near your skill level when it comes to opening the fridge and unfolding a meal out of scraps.
Can we go back a bit?
Yes.
Do you actually enjoy cooking, Joan, or
Not a lot now.
did you enjoy cooking when you had the hotel?
Yes, well, when you've got a family. Sometimes I find it very difficult to embrace today's cooking. The recipes are very different for a start, and I can look at a recipe and if it's got 2 lists of ingredients, I dismiss it completely. I think, no, I'm not getting all that lot in because I might never use it again.
Yes.
When did you learn to cook and who taught you?
I did a bit of cooking at home because my mother worked and she would sort of say what was for dinner, and if it was simple, I could do it.
Sort of by osmosis, wasn't it really, that you learned from your mum?
Yes.
Just by helping out all the time.
Picking things up.
Yeah.
And then getting married so young.
Well, we moved from Sheffield to March and rationing was still on, of course, and it was a case of, well, get on with it.
I mean, I find it interesting that when I am interviewing, some of the most highly regarded chefs, and they are cooking with something that you have always cooked with and have always seen as quite normal, yes. Things like lard, there's a double-page spread in the Financial Times about lard. And I found it so funny because it's always been in your fridge.
Yeah.
Grandma's fridge is just full of little pots of fat and gravy.
Well, yes, but that's because when I do a roast, I take the fat off that I've used and put it in a little dish. And next time I do them, I do a bit, and I use part of that, and it does give roast potatoes a nice flavour. The same with gravy. I don't throw any gravy away at all. I freeze it, and then when I've got something like sausage toad or shepherd's pie that don't have so much gravy, well, my family love gravy, so it's useful there. I mean, it might not be the right flavour, but it's nice gravy.
Yeah.
You can get away with anything if you've got good gravy, because it's the first thing people taste.
I think the other reason why those kind of old school recipes slightly fell from favour was because so many people moved towards eating less meat or not eating meat at all.
But that's what I say. Recipes are so different now. I suppose because of the availability of everything. I mean, in my day, you didn't have the great array of spices that we have now and herbs. You didn't buy horseradish and you didn't buy mint and things like that. You made your own. You grew horseradish and you grated it and you cried all the time you were grating it.
Is that why you're so attuned to the cost of things? I think far more so. Well, I know far more so than I am.
I look at things in the shops and think, I won't buy that, I can make it for half the price. You buy 2 fish cakes, I don't know how much they are. I know they're tasteless, but I make 6 fish cakes out of a £1.25 tin of pilchards. I mean, they're not little fish cakes, they're quite fat. When you've had a joint, especially me on my own, I don't think, well, I'll have that in a sandwich. I would freeze that. And then once in a while, I'll get them all out, mince it, and we'll have shepherd's. Well, it'd be cottage pie, wouldn't it? Or even make rissoles, which are equivalent to burgers now. See, you don't necessarily need a lot of meat.
Which is how we're all being encouraged to cook now, by using meat as flavour and a sideline rather than as the main event. And it just shows you how things have come full circle and how that knowledge, which is within your generation, is more applicable now than ever before.
Then it was time for tea and...
A bit moist to shine up. Yeah, you've got the best.
The shortbread is just...
different.
Softer, different. I see why...
semolina in it.
Aha.
Yes.
It's totally different. I mean, when you buy them, the shortbread is a lot sweeter. It hasn't got that granularity that works really well with the caramel.
Are there things that you wish you had learned from her, where you think, oh, God, I must ask Grandma about that because I don't know how to do that?
Yes, absolutely loads, I'd say, particularly pastry. And making, we were talking earlier about the chicken carcass and stripping that and boiling the bones and
Well, this is it. The chicken is such a cheap meal. Not necessarily a cheap chicken, but a cheap meal because there is so much you can do with it. But, you know, it takes time. What I was saying to Clare, I hear all these women who are busy because they work full-time, and I worked full-time all my life. In the morning, I had to think what I was having for dinner because I couldn't pop in the shop like Clare does sometimes to buy my dinner. And I think that is more economical. I mean, and with modern ovens, you can preset your oven, you can prepare it the night before, and it's ready when you come home. So you haven't got, as they say, and my kids are that hungry, I have to make. I think, well, no, I don't go with it.
It's also a different attitude to child rearing, isn't it? I mean, my mother worked full-time, but, you know, we were all assigned. You peel the potatoes, you set the table, so that by the time she got home, we were ready.
I think the other thing about making sure that your children are involved is that you convey that it isn't just one person's job, and in most cases it's not just the mum's job, that it should be a communal activity and isn't just something to take for granted. She says, having taken millionaire shortbread for granted for years, but, you know, generally speaking,
yes,
involving everybody in the peeling and the preparing and the chopping means that still persistent idea that women are the cooks of the house gets disabused quite quickly, which I think is important.
Food journalist Clare Finney and her grandmother, Joan Fox.
The beaded curtain, that's actually from my grandmother's house in India. The sound of people brushing past that was the sound of somebody going in and out of the kitchen.
Chef patron Chet Sharma opened his restaurant Bibi in London's Mayfair in 2021. It's glamorous, almost impossible to get a reservation, and the reviews are 5-star. But the place is full of grandmotherly touches, like that bead curtain.
The back of the bar seating, all of these designs were taken from my grandmother's pashminas. We worked with a mill up in Sheffield who recreated them in a more suitable, hard-wearing material. But they're all based on things that my grandmother wore. And then the half curtains based on what my grandmother used to have in her flat in Bombay.
And even the name, Bibi, has the same sort of links.
Bibi means lady of the house in Urdu, and we kind of use it as an honorific, where my family's from in India, up in Punjab, for the most senior woman in the household. So my BBG, was my grandmother's mum, but for many people it just means grandmother. There were a few reasons to name the restaurant Bibi. So both of my grandmothers grew up on farms in India and sort of taught me from an early age about food and ingredients, things like pickling, preservation. You know, every morning they'd milk the buffalo and you'd make yogurt and butters and things off the back of that as well, to extend the shelf life of things. So that was just a very natural way of growing up, but also just how to make tasty food. So I've been very fortunate to work with some great chefs during my professional career, but it all began at home with my grandmothers. When I thought about warmth of hospitality as well, the art of looking after people, which is actually what our jobs are, that's what we're stewards of really as chefs. I thought about my grandmother's dining table, you know, that generosity, the conviviality as well about being around a table. It always came back to the way my grandmothers did things. And then finally, actually, with a restaurant that serves quite a progressive type of Indian cuisine, for us it's a good centering point to say if an Indian grandmother walked into our dining room, despite how it looks, despite the music and all of that and some of the ingredients, would you recognise the food at Bibi as intrinsically Indian? As long as we can tick that box, then it goes on the menu here.
But dishes in here are not directly the ones that your grandmothers would have cooked.
Would my grandmother recognise a raw Cornish tuna with pineapple saru as something that she grew up eating? No, but the flavours are very reminiscent of a traditional saru made in Kerala, which is really, really far away from where our family's from. So an Indian grandmother from that part of the country would recognise that dish as there's something in there that ties it back to this nostalgic sense of Indian food. That said, we do sometimes use direct recipes from my upbringing. Now, I'm also a bit sheepish about saying direct because we didn't really have recipes growing up. A lot of it was a pinch of this and a pinch of that. Sometimes even to the point where my grandmother would hide spice mixes from us And as soon as you turn your back, then all of a sudden everything in the pan completely changed and you had no idea why. So we use ideas from them, maybe not necessarily their recipes, just because their recipes changed over time.
The recipes have changed, but watching and helping his grandmothers shaped Chet's tastes and his cooking.
I was quite a poorly child. The first 5 or 6 years of life were not the best for me medically, and what that meant was I clung to my grandmother a lot. So I guess I learned how to cook from her, but also a bit of household management.
It's hard now because we can't watch your grandma cooking, but what was it like to watch her cook?
She used to make what we call a sabji. It's like a stir fry with butternut squash peels, but just the peels. The flesh would be used for something else, and it was incredible. It was actually tastier than quite often what we'd have with the flesh of the squash or the pumpkin. So yeah, that was an example of her being really resourceful, and like nothing goes to waste. The one that I used to hate as a kid, now we love melon seeds in India, both just to eat as a snack, but also you'd powder them and then use them to thicken sort of more luxurious curries, let's say. But I'll tell you what, when you have to peel 2,000 melon seeds, you start to appreciate them more, but also despise the sight of them. But that's the kind of thing that my grandmother would do. She's like, well, we're not throwing the melon seeds away.
So there are no melon seed dishes here at Bibi?
Actually, there are, but you can buy peeled melon seeds now, which honestly would horrify my grandmother. But, you know, I don't think I'd be able to retain my team in the kitchen for that long if I was getting them to peel melon seeds every day.
I think one of the things that's come out of making this programme is that it used to be that what you're talking about, it was quite common. Children were expected to play a part in this. Culturally, that was true. And that seems to have died out.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, but actually this one thing I really like with what my mum's doing with my niece and nephews. They are still very involved in household jobs. I think it's very easy to avoid all of that and focus on making sure you study and then you have your extracurricular activities, you've got enough balance in life. But actually, that is a kind of balance as well, you know. Yeah. I remember we'd sit down in an afternoon or an evening, my grandmother put ZTV on, and we'd sit there and fold samosas for hours at end. But of course, you get the reward of that at the end because you get to eat them. It was a whole day process. So you knew as a child, by the time you ate that samosa, you knew the work that had gone into it and you really valued it as a result. Probably sound a bit Tim Spector-y now, but you know.
Then, for the second time recording this episode, I'm offered some grandma-inspired treats.
We have the naan khatai. Naan khatai is basically India's version of shortbread, made with, in this case, with chickpea flour, as my grandmother used to make it before. So it's quite crumbly, quite soft, and then just to add another layer of granniness to it, there's a little gel made with lavender.
How wonderful.
And just some chai. Again, there's no specific recipe. We modify it depending on the weather. It's quite cold at the moment, so a bit more ginger in there.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah.
My memory of chai is on the streets of Calcutta that you would get that very sweet boiled up condensed milk boiled with tea and some spices, and then you'd smash the cup into the gutter.
Yeah, please don't smash these cups. They're very, very expensive.
I would never smash mine, and my Indian friends thought I was bonkers because I was building up a collection of them, you know, which I was going to take home.
Well,
ridiculous.
It's an untreated terracotta. Yeah. If you smash it, it breaks back down into the soil, and then it's completely combustible and renewable. And now I get annoyed when I go to India and I see people selling chai in plastic cups. Oh. Because there is no facility to reuse anything like that. So it's actually much better to use the terracotta, throw it on the floor, and then the next day there'll be a whole new range of cups there. But yeah, we can't do that in London. So please don't smash these cups. These are treated, they are washable, they are, like I say, eye-wateringly expensive.
Wonderful shortbread.
Shortbread of a different kind. What is it with grannies and shortbread? Certainly something wonderful. Chef Chet Sharma. At King's College London, Dr. Fiona Lavelle is a lecturer in nutritional sciences, and she's been researching attitudes to cooking, what she calls a life skill, amongst different generations.
We do have some research showing that the higher age groups have higher levels of cooking skills confidence and food skills confidence. We also know qualitatively from our research, people will report that they learn from their parents at younger ages, and obviously they may not have the same time to transfer the skills to their children, but they will also report that they may not have as much knowledge or as much skills as the previous generation as well.
So are they passing on, are the over 65s, the ones who do cook, are they passing on that knowledge to younger generations?
We do have some research around where the granny generation was passing on to what we'll call the parental generation, so the next generation down. However, that now we're showing that the current parental generation is not transferring the skills down to the next level, so the children generation, if we're thinking on those three levels. So we are now missing that gap and the lack of transference there that's now happening. And obviously there's multitude of factors impacting on that transference of skills. But the mother is reported as the primary source of learning still across the literature. So if children are not learning from their mothers now, then there is that necessary gap and we need to provide some other source of learning as well.
So is that gap, do you think, occurring because of the fact that very few schools now teach cooking? Or is it the commonness of processed food being everywhere? Or is it poverty? You know, people can't afford ingredients. What do you think it is?
I think it's a combination of all of the above. I have some recent research around the cost of living crisis and people can't afford the cost of ingredients, so therefore then they become reliant on convenience products that are very, very cheap because of that initial upfront cost. They also acknowledge that in the long term, what we call batch cooking, so cooking and freezing meals, would end up cheaper. However, that initial upfront cost, they just don't have the means from it. Food education is compulsory in primary schools. However, there's reports around it's not actually occurring as much or as often as I'd like, and that can be down to time and lack of resources as well.
At the same time, we have this interest in grandmothers cooking through social media. I mean, the phenomenal success of Pasta Grannies, about grannies all over Italy. Do you think that might translate into a new interest in what older generations could teach us about food?
I mean, it would be great if it did. There is a lot to learn from previous generations. However, we do also know that cooking is becoming a spectator sport. If you think about it, how much cooking is on TV, how much do we actually then cook from what we've seen on the television or across social media? Is it just a source of entertainment now? Some of the sociological research reports aspects around that we are now putting cooking on a pedestal, that people are intimidated, so they don't think, I mean, if you do cook at home, would you take a picture of all your meals and put them on social media? Maybe not. They all don't look pretty. And I myself will also pause before, if I think it doesn't look pretty, it's not going online. Whereas we need to now remove that kind of thought around cooking, that the food doesn't need to be Michelin star for you to eat it.
What did you learn from your granny?
I would have learned a lovely traditional brown bread, what we call brown bread, but soda bread. And she would have always made it and put a cross in the top of it. And I always wondered what this cross was about. Why do we do it? Was it just hangover from traditional religious beliefs? And eventually got the answer from my mum, not my granny, but she said they cut the cross so the heat disperses throughout the loaf evenly. I don't know whether it's true, but this is what I learnt.
And you make your granny's soda bread now?
Attempt to, but it's still never as good.
Dr. Fiona Lavelle, her bread never as good as Grandma's. She must take heart from the way that Granny's cooking is now, as they say, trending hard on social platforms and appearing in ads. This advertisement is from the United States.
Whether you call her Abuela, Nana, Yaya, Grams, Gigi, Mimi, or Granny, Grandma knows a sweet treat makes any meal special. So come to McDonald's and treat yourself to the Grandma McFlurry today.
McDonald's, pulling at the heartstrings in a sugary way. I wondered what food journalist Clare Finney and her grandmother Joan made of ads like this.
Well, I think it's very sad. I mean, I've been so lucky to grow up with a grandma for whom treats wasn't actually confined to sugar. And I think that is in itself a pernicious idea today, that treats mean sweetness. The ritual was about family and about somebody having, as you say, Grandma, like made it for us and taken joy in baking for the family, particularly with something like ground rice cake or, you know, some of the pies that you make. We were connected to you, you know, to your mum or to, you know, my granddad's family, our heritage as well, you know. And that was all of a piece. There was a holistic understanding of what sweetness meant. Whereas when a brand takes that in order to exploit those emotions that you have around your grandmothers and simply sell you sugar without any of the kind of surrounding context, without the ritual, without the recipe, without the heritage or the lineage, I think that's very damaging in a very insidious way as well.
We offered McDonald's a chance to respond, but they didn't get back to us.
Well, this one, Doritos.
When she told us she wanted to drive again, we all said, "Seriously, Nana?" But Nana does what Nana does.
Doritos have a grandma leaping a line of cars in a monster truck. That's more like you, Joan, I think. It's part of a snack brand's new campaign designed to position Doritos as a snack for the bold.
That sort of leaves me speechless, to be honest. Grandma?
You know, I have an awful saying, when children were fashionable, I wasn't fashionable. And when I was a teenager, teenagers weren't. And we've sort of gone back that children are the be-all and end-all of everything. Are we trying to make grandmas like that as well?
Joan Fox, are we? Is there nothing that can't be hyped and sold? Seems not. But perhaps it's about time for a bit of focus on grandmothers and their skills. A few weeks ago, we got a most unlikely email from Del Monte. Remember those ads years ago featuring the man from Del Monte? Well, their latest campaign is to find the nan from Del Monte. They've been looking for people to nominate their nans, their grandmas, for the role. And they've now shortlisted 3 nans. One of them is Pauline Crosby from the village of Ditchingham in South Norfolk. She was nominated by her grown-up granddaughter, Poppy.
I'm just a home cook. I was brought up in a family where everything was cooked from scratch. We didn't have much money. It was a large family, and it was pots of stews and lentil soups and soda bread. It's in Ireland, so it was soda bread. And there wasn't this culture of anything between meals. I didn't see a potato crisp till I left home at 15. When I started my family, I tried to do similar, and I brought my 2 girls up to cook. One of them could do a roast dinner when she was 11. My daughter is now teaching her grandchildren. So it's a sort of going down the generations, but it's just ordinary home-cooked food.
So what do you make of the reasons that are frequently offered to why people don't cook?
I think there's a fracture in the generations. One of my last jobs was supporting families, and their parents didn't cook. They just didn't know how to cook, so they would go to various stores and get things for £1, you know, cheesecakes, meals. They therefore didn't teach their children to cook, and so it goes on. When I went to school in Ireland, it was very much domestic science, and I've still got the book Cookery Nutrition, and it's still valid today. I think, yes, everyone leads busy lives, but it's about preparation. I just think we need to be teaching people again and get people cooking, because otherwise it's costing us billions on the NHS.
Del Monte says, and I quote from their message to us, that the campaign is to help inspire families to keep baking traditions alive, because they say modern challenges like busy lifestyles and rising costs are putting these traditions at risk. What do you make of that?
Yes, I agree, modern lifestyles, but people don't know how to change. You know, if their mothers didn't cook, or their grandmothers even didn't cook.
And let's not even talk about dads and granddads.
Yeah, well, actually, there are some men who are quite good cooks, but my husband wouldn't know where to find anything. So the statement's fine, but how are we going to change that? I think it's time for the excuses to stop, and it's time for people to think, where do you want your health to be when you're my age? I'm 75 next year, and I'm healthier than some of the people in my family, and I want to maintain that health because no one else is going to do it. So I'm getting fed up with the excuses, but I do feel very sorry for parents now on a very low income, because I used to do all their financial statements to send off to creditors. And I would struggle to do a budget sheet for them now because there used to be £10 for your electric, £10 for your gas. It's not happening now.
Did people just stop listening to their grandmas?
I think the sort of grandma that we think of in the past, or how Poppy views me, families are fractured now. I'm known as Nanny Norfolk. And why am I known as Nanny Norfolk? Because they got loads of nannies. They don't have two. And a lot, they're distanced from their families.
It seems to me that if you just thought of cooking as a life skill, it will get you through life. It will create good health. It will bond you to your family and your friends.
And save you a lot of money.
Quite straight and save you a lot of money, yeah.
But some people just don't like cooking. You won't change that. I mean, I think, is it 2 cooking programmes running at present? Nadia is cook once, eat twice.
In these tricky times, we're all looking for ways to make the most of our weekly food shop. So in this series, I'll be sharing the savvy recipes I rely on day to day. To save
Last week, my husband said, well, you'd better tell Nadia, we've cooked once and we're eating 4 times. Yeah. You know, it's so easy. You have a roast dinner and all the vegetables are left. And then I had a pasta and sausage and mascarpone and I had some of that left. And I bunged it all together, added some more sauce, topped it with cheese and breadcrumbs, baked it in the oven. Job's your uncle, you know. That's it, done. And it's delicious.
Pauline Crosby, give that woman a cooking show. Or perhaps just make her the Minister of Food. So, here's to grannies revolutionising our food, our health and our home lives. If you've got any good granny stories, let us know. Our email address is thefoodprogramme@bbc.co.uk, or you can find us on social media at BBC Food Prog. Thanks for listening.
Producer Natalie Donovan, who is definitely not a granny, and I, who definitely is one, hope you enjoyed that dip into a world that both of us think has got a lot to teach us.
One winter's night in 1974, a crime took place that would obsess the nation.
We're still looking for Lucan all over the world.
Lord Lucan is said to have killed the family nanny and to have attacked his wife before disappearing. Why has this, of all crimes, captured our imagination?
It's partly that the evidence is so murky.
As I try to get to the bottom of the case, my preconceptions are blown apart.
I mean, this is a pretty weird stuff to have in a box, isn't it? What on earth is this for?
The Lucan Obsession with me, Alex von Tunselman. From BBC Radio 4. Listen now on BBC Sounds.